and Resources Committee. I'd ask all of you to find your seats, please. I will ask staff to confirm we have a quorum.
We do.
Yes, we do.
Thank you very much. We have a very full agenda today, which includes the university's annual capital plans along with their capital improvement plans, 2 proposed policy revisions, 2 leases, the Teachers Academy budget, and 3 items on the consent agenda. Please remember that only members of the committee can provide a second to a motion and can vote on a motion. And please remember to speak clearly into the microphone so the entire room can hear you. For our first order of business, the committee is asked to approve the consent agenda, which includes items 10, 11, and 12. Does anyone have any conflict to declare for items 10, 11, or 12 that are scheduled for consent? Okay. I move the committee approve items 10, 11, and 12 as listed on the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Excuse me, please. Okay, our next order of business is to approve the minutes from our prior meeting. Are there any questions or comments related to the minutes? Hearing none, I move the committee approve the public and executive session minutes from May 26, 2022 of the Finance, Capital, and Resources Committee. Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. For item number 2, the board office asks the committee to review for consideration on the first reading the proposed revisions to board policies in Chapter 4 related to the tuition setting process. John Arnold from the Arizona Board of Regents will present this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd invite the CFOs up to the table if I know they have some comments on this undertaking. Based on conversations with the presidents and board members, we started about 6 months ago to look at reforming how we do tuition setting. And we've talked to several of you about this in depth, but I'd like to walk through the proposal that's in front of you so that everybody can understand what we're talking about. So I don't know who has control of the slides. You do over there. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So the goals, when we started looking this at,
We have addressed the beeping. Okay, so very technical.
So when we started looking at tuition setting and potentially reforming tuition setting, we wanted to accomplish a few things. One, we wanted to improve transparency to help the public better understand what are the costs, what does it cost to attend our institutions. Number 2, provide longer planning horizons for students and families, and not just students that are at our campuses, but down into high school. You know, as families start making academic decisions about whether they can attend a university post high school, we want to give them some security around what that financial planning looks like. And then finally, create market flexibility around non-resident and online students. Non-resident and online students have become a much bigger part of our student base over the last few years. Those markets are that pricing is generally set around market rates, and we wanted to give some additional flexibility to the presidents to be able to do that. Next slide, please. So on the left, our current tuition setting is really built around 2 items. One, the published price or the sticker price, and this is those dollar amounts that the board votes on every year. So this is the tuition rate. We currently adopt 27 different tuition rates. So it's not a simple process. Again, getting back that transparency goal. So the board controls that, and then net tuition, or what the president's charge to an actual student after discounting or after scholarship, that's really at the presidential level. So we set published price, which really functions as a maximum tuition, and then the presidents work with students in different programs to come up with the discounted price, what the students actually pay. For our resident students, for example, our published price averages around $11,000. On average, what the individual student pays is about $4,000. So what we're proposing is to add another layer to this process, where we would set an actual maximum tuition, and then presidents would set a published price underneath that maximum tuition, and then of course net tuition would remain with the president. And that, what the board would do is set a multiple year maximum tuition. We're proposing 6 years worth of maximum tuition, and then the presidents each year would publish a published price that is within that maximum tuition number. Next slide, please. And please, there's any questions, happy to discuss. So we went through various iterations of this, trying to build a graphic to explain how this would work. That first red thing, so what we're proposing is to set a maximum tuition growth rate for the next 6 years. In this example, board sets a 2.5% tuition growth rate. Maximum tuition growth rate. Now, that's just an example. We don't know what the number might be, but 2.5%. That would go for 6 years. We wanted to put in some rolling aspect of that, so it's great for the student today that gets 6 years of security, but in 6 years, 5 years from now, those students only have 1 year. So we want to come in before the 6 years are out and extend out those rates. So what we're proposing is that every 4 years, the board looks at this again and then extends out the maximum tuition growth rates. So in this example, we set maximum growth rates this year in fiscal 23 for years 24 through 29. We would come back in the fall of 2026 and look at, so you're in fiscal 27, look at where we're at, and then add an additional 4 years onto that 6 years. So you go back, you take it back to 6 years. Any questions about that? It's once you get it, it's pretty simple, but it's really hard to explain. No, everyone's looking at me like they understand, so we'll move on. Next slide, please.
I think it is important that everybody sort of understand what you're proposing. And so are there any questions? Because right now is the time to ask those questions. So, okay, thank you.
Okay. What we're proposing is these maximum rates apply to resident on-campus undergraduate and graduate tuition, all academic fees, differential tuition, so statewide tuition, for example, at NAU or any other medical school, would have its et cetera, housing plans and meal plans. And so there would be financial stability, security, planning, predictability, I guess is the right word, for the next several years. In addition to this, to add to financial predictability, we are proposing the elimination of all class fees, so that, and consolidating those down into program fees, so students know from semester to semester they're going to pay the same amount, and their annual tuition fees won't change based on their class load. Next slide, please. So that's where those growth rates would apply. How are we going to handle non-resident and online market rates? So what we would propose is the non-resident and international maximum would be 4 times the resident rate. So we just tie it to that base rate. And then online would be 1/7 of the resident semester rate, which is a per credit hour rate. So we charge online tuition at per credit hour. So it'd be 1/7 of the semester rate. And you can see on here what that would mean for ASU. Their current published tuition is $10,978. That would lead to a maximum non-resident tuition of $43,912. I think their current rate is a little over $30,000. and an online per credit hour max of $784. Our per credit hours are in the 500, about 550 right now. So it would give them some flexibility around the market within those ranges. A couple of extra things on online. There are a handful of high demand online courses, online degrees, graduate degrees at the University of Arizona that do not fit within this range. They're actually quite a bit higher. So what we put in the policy is the board could adopt a schedule for specific courses in addition to this. So the board would set tuition rates separately for those types of high-end, high-demand graduate programs. The other item in here that we've talked about is capping tuition for resident online students. As mentioned, we charge online at a per credit hour rate. At NAU and UA, there is no concept of a full-time student for online students. At ASU, they do, for resident students, create a full-time status. Once you reach full-time, no matter how many credit hours you take, you don't pay anymore. This policy as written would mandate that NAU and UA create that full-time status for resident students.
Regent Mata?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Arnold, so on the non-resident maximum, that's maximum. That doesn't mean that that's because we have the NAU West, I say alliance, right? So that's just the maximum, right? We can,
Yes.
from there, it could be any,
Yeah, so WUI would fit within that and all.
We.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I mean to say we, right? It's MUI.
WUI.
WUI. I'm so sorry.
Think
WUI, yeah.
WUI?
WUI. Yeah, they look at me, yeah. And then you look at me.
Don't do that.
Sorry. No, I saw the
Patient
face from
talent.
Laurie and what yours said, like, what are you saying? Yeah, that's
Sorry.
because of that program. I said, wait, that program is really capped, right? So, okay,
It is.
yeah.
It is.
Sorry about that. It's what, 2:00?
I'm
No,
feeling
we
the
did
same
clarify.
thing clearly. So yes, this would just be a maximum rate that then the presidents could work within. Next slide, please.
Thank you.
So that's board action. And again, the board would come in once every 4 years to take those actions. Presidential action would be on an annual basis. By November 15th of each year, the presidents would communicate to the board what the published tuition is going to be for the next academic year. Right now, we do not publish tuition until April, so this would accelerate the publication of tuition for the next academic year by about 4 months, again, giving our students and families a little bit more predictability. So they would communicate that to the board on November 15th, and then by December 15th, they would have to make a public announcement what that rate is going to be. So for example, if we adopt this December 15th of 2023, the universities would publish the FY24 and 25 tuition rates, and then we would also publish the FY25-26 maximum tuition, because the percentage is calculated off the prior year published rate. So once we get that published rate, we can calculate the dollar amount of the maximum rate for the next year for maximum tuition.
Regent Herbert.
How do the CFOs feel about this? Because you don't get a good look at your costs, but yet you have to name the tuition increase. Clearly baffled, aren't you?
Yeah, we're speechless. But no, it's an excellent question, and I think something that we've talked about. I think John and the staff have done a great job, helping us think this through and sort of identifying some of the pressure points, if you will, and that's one of them. Clearly, what would happen is that we would be, setting our prices significantly ahead of knowing what happens with a lot of things, including state investment. You're never at a point where everything is certain. Your budget is a set of guesses and projections. You hope they're educated guesses. As state investment has declined as a proportion of our budgets, frankly, that maybe has relieved a little bit of that stress. It would still be nice to be able to adjust. We've certainly at least suggested that maybe one thing to think about here is kind of an exigent circumstances sort of a clause, where if we, for example, and I'm not suggesting that we would or should, enter another recession, and that it has some significant negative impacts financially, that there be an opportunity to make some adjustments out of what would otherwise be the structure that John's just described.
This invites you to put a safety factor in there, thus put tuitions at a little higher level than you might normally.
In some fashion, the whole goal is the things that John laid out is, predictability, and obviously to provide maximum accessibility and affordability. But yeah, there could be a scenario where that would be wise.
Madam Chair, Regent Herbold, I think that is one of the factors, and one of the things that we should be thinking about too is just the length of the period. John laid out 6 years in terms of what that period is. We should really think through, do we transition, initially to a 6-year period, or do we, think about, potentially having a first transition of maybe 2 to 3 years, and then extending based upon our learnings into that 6-year timeframe. So that would be an option for the board to consider as a first phase on this, because to your question, it is a little uncertain in terms of the costs. Inflation is certainly an unknown here over the next couple of years, and it is something that we really should all be considering as we look to this.
I'd like to add that one of the tools that we all use is the Higher Education Price Index, and that report is usually published in December. So we know that the 2.7% inflation that was reported in last year's report is not going to be the same inflation that's reported this year. So we can project that it's higher, but that will help us inform our planning for the next year.
Has the group seriously considered Bjorn's suggestion? 3 years instead of 6 as an initial period to see what happens?
Regent Pacheco, Regent Herbold, that's a relatively new suggestion, but this is a first look at this policy and something we can discuss with the board if we want to ease into this multi-year tuition study instead of going in.
Well, it's more up to these three.
Madam Chair, if I can make a comment, the way the policy is drafted, it allows for the board to sort of at any time in that 6-year window, if necessary, to come and make adjustments. Now there is sort of a process for having a public hearing and getting public input, but there is the opportunity as written to make adjustments within that cycle, any given cycle.
The other thing I would mention is 2 things. One, for the last several years, both the University of Arizona and NAU have had guarantee and promise pledge, tuition pledge programs where they pledge to an incoming student that their tuition is fixed for the next 4 years. And so any price changes that those 2 universities have been doing have only applied to a very small portion of their student base, their freshmen. Second, ASU for the last several years has been living under a 10-year tuition promise that they would grow tuition no more than 3%. And you've been doing that now for close to 10 years, if not the full decade. So as we're moving towards a 6-year proposal, it's really not that far off from what's going on at the university level anyway. We are bringing that up to the board level and codifying those rates a little bit. But ASU's lived within this structure for many years, and in some ways, the pledge and guarantee plans are more restrictive than what we're doing here. Next slide. So some outstanding questions, and I think, you know, the 6-year time horizon should be on there. I didn't put that one on there, but I think that's a good question. One question that the universities have raised is, should resident online students be capped at that full time rate? Lisa and I have worked on it a little bit at UA, and you estimate that that'll cost you around $2.5–3 million. Is that correct? I've not had a chance to go through that with Bjorn, so I'm not sure what the impact at NAU is. So that's a real question. That's a potential revenue loss for the universities. Second, should the maximum tuition growth rate apply to the prior year published rate? And what I mean by that is should the universities be able to bank any percentage growth rate that they don't use? So for example, if we set 2.5% and they only raise it 2%, does that extra 0.5% go away, which is the way this is written, or should it roll over to the next year, which would then allow them to increase it 3%? And that's something we've kicked around to try to alleviate that pressure for the universities to maximize the use of that maximum rate. You know, if it's use it or lose it, then they might use it. The reason we proposed it this way is if they don't use it and it builds up and a university comes out with a 5% rate increase one year, that would kind of defeat the purpose of what we're trying to do here. So it's outstanding question. And then implementation timeline. Should the board want to move forward with this proposal? You know, again, this is structured to move tuition setting into the fall. Should we keep it in the spring? Should we keep it in the spring this year as a transition year, which would, you know, I don't know that universities are really prepared to set tuition in November, not to mention 6 years worth of tuition in November. You know, we could go through the policy setting process, have the policy in place at the November board meeting, and then launch into tuition setting process where we set those rates in either the February or the April meeting cycles. There's lots of options here in terms of transitioning and having a half step into this 3-year cycle as a transition step. I think is a real possibility. So that's the end of my slides. Happy to take feedback and really looking for committee input on how they feel about this proposal. Is this something we want to pursue, and at what speed?
And John, to clarify, we are doing this to create consistency, to simplify the process, and to be more transparent.
And correct, and to give families a longer planning horizon as they look at the costs of going to
Consistent, just to be as consistent as possible for families.
That's correct.
Are there any comments, questions?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sure, that's good.
Regent Duval. So I turn away
I
from
know,
you.
yeah,
Anybody want to speak?
Of course. I really welcome this, and I want to describe why. I've got a unique history with tuition, having voted on it now 9 times, and having enjoyed some ads when I ran for office. I mean, this is a hot topic. And when you look at the polling about the Board of Regents, one issue jumps out is tuition. I mean, we pay a huge price for the way we do tuition. And what's frustrating about it is that we pay this price on an advertised tuition price, which most Arizona students don't pay. And in fact, our current model, the reality is exact opposite from the public perception, which is that the public perception is that most kids pay that price, when in fact, because we moved from a low tuition, no aid model to a medium tuition, high aid model, we have more access at lower price at essentially a flat tuition for most Arizona students, which no one in the public understands. And so we've built a model, and then you add this, and then we advertise these inaccurate price that Arizona students don't pay, and we do it right in the middle of a legislative session. If you are going to design a system to extract the maximum political cost for something that wasn't real, we've succeeded. And so we've simply got to have a different approach. And, you know, I think there's been a lot of thought, could you move to a, you know, net tuition model for Arizona students? Are there other ways to do it? Hard to accomplish. So the idea is, let's create a predictability that is more automatic, subject to exigent circumstances, to Regent Herbold's point, which, you know, in 2009, we raised tuition 3 times in 1 year. So, you know, the board always has the power to do that if you need to. But I think we've got to get out of the business of advertising this price and paying this huge political price for something that's not accurate. However, I'm going to propose an idea that I think is going to make the government affairs people absolutely light their hair on fire, but at least just to think about. What's not predictable is the level of state support. And that's the other factor. And, you know, the Holy Grail, and where it would be great to be, California did it 5 years ago. Jerry Brown and Janet Napolitano was the chancellor, and they said, there's a 5-year funding plan. Here's the state's level of commitment. Here's the tuition level commitment. And no one discussed it for 5 years. That would be the Holy Grail. I don't know how to get there, but I have 2 specific ideas that I would just like to put out, maybe not for discussion today, but just to think about. Number 1, in any year where the state support grows by X, say 20%, we ask the presidents to give us a 0 tuition increase. We basically say the state has picked up the difference. We will not ask it from families. And the second, conversely, in any year where the state cuts university funding by 20% or more, we release the cap. And let's make that association between our pricing and the state's investment more explicit. Now, I mentioned at the start, I voted for tuition 9 times. I voted in favor 8 and no once. And I want to explain why, because that's the connection. In my prior 8 years voting for tuition, in each of those years, the state cut our funding. And so we went to tuition to make up the difference. Last year, the state increased its funding to a record level, and we received federal support. And I thought, if there's ever a time when we don't have to go to the families for the difference, it's now. It's under these conditions. And so my point of that is just to ponder the idea that we explicitly communicate with our legislature. When you are a partner, we're going to give you cover by giving you credit for a 0 tuition increase because you've met your partnership responsibilities. But conversely, when you come up short, we have to make up the difference because we've got to pay the light bill and we've got to pay the faculty, and because these institutions require money. So just 2 thoughts, Madam Chair. Sorry for the long filibuster.
Not at all. Thank you very much. Intriguing. Are there any other comments, thoughts? John?
Thank you. So next steps, we do have some technical edits to this version of the draft. We'll make those technical edits. We will bring it back to our board meeting in a couple of weeks. It'll be on consent. Have some conversation with folks in the meantime, and then we can move from there. So unless there's objections, the process we would put in place is that we have the opportunity to bring it back again in the November cycle and bring it back to this committee, and then have another opportunity in the November board meeting to discuss it again. So you have 3 more opportunities at this thing before it would go into effect. But I think we would be on a track to put the policy in place and then go through a tuition setting cycle post that. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Robbins.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to weigh in, and I'll look to Lisa to either confirm or deny, and if she denies, then I will withdraw. But you made comment about what's the timeline for this. I think I would raise my hand and say this November, we're ready to go. We're ready to go. But it doesn't sound like, from what you just said, that that's even possible if it's not even going to be approved until November.
I think that's work.
Any other comments? Hearing none. I move that the committee forward to the full board for first reading the proposed revisions to the board policies as amended by John just now, Of Chapter 4, Student Fees, Residency and Financial Aid, 4-101, Tuition and Fees Definitions, 4-103, Proposals for Tuition and Fees, 4-104, Procedure for Setting Tuition and Fees, and 4-105, Fees, as presented in the executive summary. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion passes. Okay, moving on. Items 3, 4, and 5 are the review of each of the university's annual capital plan and capital improvement plan. The annual capital plan, or ACP, is a forecast of major capital projects for the next 12 months, while the capital improvement plan, or CIP, includes a 4-year forecast beyond the ACP timeframe. The CIPs are due to the governor and the legislature by October 15th. Reviewing the CAP and the CIP, the ACP and the CIP, I'm getting confused with my A's and C's, at the same time gives us the opportunity to see a 5-year forecast of major capital projects. We are going to start with ASU or NAU, followed by ASU, and then the U of A. And I have asked all of the university's CFOs to move through their presentations quickly, given our time constraint, but also recognizing that the regents have had ample opportunity to review the documents before them and also ask questions of not only the universities, but also of ABOR staff. Bjorn, the floor is yours.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, NAU presents, as Chair Pacheco mentioned, annual capital plan and a capital improvement plan with no projects for the first year, this fiscal year, as well as no first-year projects in the CIP. As noted in the materials, NAU's debt capacity is well within the statutory limit of 8%. We are projected to have a highest debt capacity point of 5.1% in fiscal year 25. We have no changes in our credit ratings from Moody's and Standard & Poor's, and our statutory formula for building renewal for this upcoming year is calculated at just about 33 million, approximately 2 million more than the previous year. So as Chair Pacheco mentioned, I will stand for any questions with the materials in our ACP and CIP.
And Bjorn is now winning for most condensed presentation. And the prize is rather fabulous, just so you know.
Well, that's good to know.
Are there any questions or comments from the regents or the president or the ABOR team? Okay, hearing none. I move that the committee forward to the full board for approval Northern Arizona University's annual capital plan and the fiscal year 2024 and 2020 through 2027 capital improvement plan as described in the executive summary. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
So moved. Thank you very much, sir. Item 4A and B is a review of ASU's annual capital plan and capital improvement plan. Morgan Olson from ASU will present the item, and we'll see how he does in comparison to Bjorn, who's winning.
Well, Madam Chair, members of the committee, I had a beautifully orchestrated 2-hour and 20-minute audiovisual presentation prepared to regale you.
With
but
music.
I can, yes, with music, but I can read a room, so we will dispense with said presentation. You can see the cover sheet up there, but seriously, what we have is two things for you today. One is our annual capital plan, which applies to the current fiscal year, 2023. And then following that, our capital improvement plan. These have all been recently re-engineered. And so Lorenzo is going to correct me when I screw up the explanation of them. But basically, it's a multiple year look that's intended to give the board kind of a sense for where we're going from a built environment standpoint and perhaps some of the strategy behind it. So with respect to the annual capital plan, we have 12 total projects that total about $668 million. That's a big number. I would tell you that 2 of the projects on there are on there only for one reason. That's because it's slight increase in total authorization. That's about $250 million of that $668 million. There are 10 new projects, including 2 third-party or public-private partnership projects around housing at our West Campus and our Tempe campus. The amount of that $668 million that would be financed with debt is about $599 million. As we always do, and you have a lot of analysis on this in your book, we take a look at the impact on debt service and our overall debt levels, credit ratings, how much we'll pay annually, and making sure that we've got that built into our economic plan for the institution. In the case of this plan, the projects would increase our debt ratio by about 0.66%. Our current debt ratio is about 4.7%. So in the highest year, which we project to be fiscal year 2026, our maximum annual debt service would be about 5.36%, significantly lower than the statutory maximum of 8%. And more importantly, we believe, handleable within the planning that we have done for the institution. So I'll mention that we do have 2, and I'm moving on now, Madam Chair, if it's okay, I'll just move right on to the capital improvement plan, which actually is 4B in your binders. We have 2 first-year projects, fiscal year 2024, that would total a little bit over $97 million, as well as the calculation of the building renewal formula. The board may recall that is the formula that we're statutorily required to calculate and never gets funded. But for us, that number would be about $68.5 million for fiscal year 2024. The 2 first-year projects that we have in the front end of the capital improvement plan are a district utility plant for about $52.2 million. There's a map that you can look at if you want to know where it is. It's basically along the west side of our Tempe campus near Mill Avenue, just south of University Drive. Succinctly stated, this is a necessary infrastructure investment in order to make sure that we have both the chilling capacity and the electrical capacity to serve what we're planning to do in that area of campus. We have a multi-year, in fact, multi-decade plan to renew some of the built infrastructure in sort of the west central part of the Tempe campus. We plan to remove some of our existing buildings to end up with more efficient and newer buildings that meet today's projected needs. Our second project is for $45 million. That is a relocation of our intercollegiate athletics tennis facility and university track and field facility to the East Athletic Village on the east side of Rural, just south of Rio Salado, which is being done in concert with our Novus Innovation Corridor Master Development Plan. Those 2 projects would be financed with debt, system revenue bonds. We anticipate amortizing that over a 30-year period. The utility plant debt service would be funded with tuition. The tennis and track and field facilities would be funded with gifts and Novus revenues, some of which already are in the bank. The 2 projects, as I said, would result in about a 5.3% annual maximum debt service, all the things that are in our project. So I think that covers it unless there are questions.
Regent Penley.
Thank you, Chair Pacheco. Morgan, I just have a question about the West Campus new academic building. How does that fit into the current sense of vision for the West Campus that ASU has?
Well, thank you. And I know that Provost Gonzalez is here, and if she wants to make a comment, she's certainly welcome to do that. But several years ago, President Crow set a goal for us for that campus to reach enrollment of about 15,000 students. 2 reasons for that: to be able to appropriately and fully serve, the West Valley in Phoenix, and then also to frankly relieve some of the pressure on this campus, which is our oldest, largest, most research-intensive campus, getting pretty tight. And so we are going to be adding several academic programs that we think will be responsive to the needs of students there. We believe that we need additional space to do that. You will also see in our capital plans that we are going to be adding a 500-bed residence hall, basically phase 2 of our Casa de Oro development. It's going to be a P3 project, public-private partnership. And this academic building will sit immediately to the north of this. We master planned all of this. It's getting pretty close, I guess, Alex, to 10 years ago when we put this all together with an intent to have a larger, more student population on that campus. And so it all sort of fits together. We need space for new programs. It also gives us an opportunity. Some of our spaces that are already on that campus can be repurposed for more laboratory intensive space. And we are choosing to build newer but less expensive space that can house other non-laboratory oriented programs. So I hope that's helpful.
Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, I move that the committee forward to the full board for approval Arizona State University's annual capital plan and the fiscal year 2024 through 2027 capital improvement plan as described in the executive summary. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Thank you very much, sir. Item 5A and B is a review of the University of Arizona's capital plan, including a waiver of board policy and the capital improvement plan. Lisa from the University of Arizona will present this item for us. Lisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Pacheco. I'm really impressed with how fast Morgan did that. I'm going to try to be faster.
We are.
We spent the whole morning talking
really
about
impressive.
competition. So we have 5 projects in our ACP this year. You have information about those in your packets. As you mentioned, Chair Pacheco, we have 2 projects that we're asking for exception to board policy. Those are the build out of the second floor of the Biosciences Partnership Building at the Phoenix Biosciences Core. That will house the Center for Advanced Molecular and Immunological Therapies. Oh, goodness. CAMI. Thank you, President Robbins. It's a temporary home until we are able to construct a building for CAMI. We are asking for exception to board policy because you may remember that we received funding from the state through the New Economy Initiative, and because of the timing of the state appropriations, we were not able to include this on our previous CIP. The same is the case for the Mining and Natural Resources Museum renovation that was near the Capitol. We received $12 million from the state, so this was not included on our CIP. Also, we are asking for exception to board policy to approve that along with the 5 projects included in our ACP. I want to describe the strategy that we are taking at the U of A for capital projects. We are moving to a process where we're bundling significant projects on an every other year cycle. So you may remember that last year we didn't bring any bond funded projects forward in fiscal year 22. We have a lot this year, and we will be bringing forward a package, 3 that are in the ACP, along with tenant improvements of a shelved space in our Grand Challenges Research Building, which is under construction now. We'll be bringing those forward for financial review in the next few months. So you won't see anything in the first year of our CIP, but there are many significant projects in the following years, 25, 26, including the renovation of Centennial Hall, the construction of a CAMI building, and the Engineering Design Center. For the ACP, the total of the projects is $289 million, 105 of which will be bond funded, and that increases our debt capacity to 5.3%. We also have not had a change in our credit ratings, and we are confident that we can manage the debt service associated with these projects. I'll stop there and ask if there are any questions.
Any questions?
On-
Please. Oh, yes, Regent Herbal.
The Moody's rating of negative, you've been on that for 2 years. What's the hope?
Well, the hope is always that it will increase, right? We will have ratings called this year because we will be going out for bond financing, and we feel very confident. Our enrollment numbers are incredibly strong. President Robbins probably told you about those this year. We have record levels. Our net tuition revenue is increasing. Our margin looks healthy, so we're optimistic.
You think they have a good chance of bumping it,
We hope
getting out
so.
of the jail, so to speak?
Hope so.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
Are there
sorry.
any other questions, comments?
Nope.
Lisa, thank you very much. So I move that the committee forward to the full board for approval the University of Arizona's annual capital plan, including the waiver of board policy requiring annual capital plan projects to appear in a previous capital improvement plan, and approval of the fiscal year 2024 through 2027 capital improvement plan as described in the executive summary. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Oh, actually, I need to stay.
Oh, you do need to say. Item 6 is a review and of amendment to the master lease between the University of Arizona and Campus Research Corporation at the Bridges. Lisa will also present this item for us.
This may I have the slides for this one? I think it would be
Of
helpful to
course.
see the map here. So since 2007, the Campus Research Corporation has leased 65 acres from us south of campus, and a location known as the Bridges. You can see that in the white arrow. Next slide, please. As you know, our main campus is landlocked, and our ability to build significant capital projects on campus is limited. We do have need for space for current and future potential projects. So with our partners at Campus Research Corporation, we've identified a section of the Bridges just under 17 acres. You can see the map in your executive summary as well as here on the slide. The shaded area that's almost blue shows the 3 buildable areas of this 17-acre parcel. The blue outline shows the full carve-out, which includes street access and a stormwater retention basin. On the left upper side of the blue shaded area, you see a white building. That is our RII Mission Integration Lab. That project is already under construction and almost completed. It's research surge space that will allow us to jumpstart research programs that will move into the Applied Research Building and the Grand Challenges Research Building when they're finished. And in the top right corner of the buildable area is the image for the AZPM building, which is one of the projects that's in our ACP this year. This location is ideally suited for AZPM because it's right at the corner. It's a very prominent location in the Bridges. It has great parking for the types of public events that AZPM would like to hold there, like gubernatorial debates. And it's a wonderful visual gateway for the Bridges project. It will be the first thing that you'll see when you're traveling south and to the Bridges property. The CRC's board recently approved the return of this parcel to our control. And I'll stop there and ask if any questions.
Are there any questions of Lisa? Okay. Hearing none, I move that the committee forward to the full board for approval the University of Arizona request to amend the first amended and restated lease between the university and Campus Research Corporation as presented in the executive summary. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Thank you very much, Lisa. Moving on to item 7. As Bjorn makes his way to the table. Thank you, Bjorn. Item 7 is a review of a sublease between NAU and Kind Hospitality, Inc. in Mesa. Bjorn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. NAU presents to the committee a sublease as detailed in the executive summary that you've seen with Kind Hospitality. This sublease is an opportunity for our hotel and restaurant management program to expand its existing program to serve students in the East Valley. This will be a opportunity to provide experiential learning that takes advantage of a hotel, 150-room hotel, that we will be able to have hands-on training for students, as well as a restaurant and beverage lab. The build-out associated with this will be covered with approximately $500,000 of tenant improvements, which will include classrooms, spaces that allow for the students to have that hands-on learning. So The details of the lease, it's a 10-year lease, approximately 8,400 square feet. It has options to renew. The rate itself is very comparative and below market value rates in the Mesa area. And I will stop there and see if there's any questions as detailed in the executive summary.
Regent Penley.
Thank you, Chair Pacheco. Bjorn, I guess I'm wondering if this is a bit cart before the horse, and I realize that sometimes these things have to be done in a timely way, but has this been discussed with the other universities per the procedures that we've established? That's question number one. And number two, are there any changes to curriculum that should have been brought to the academic committee prior to this?
Madam Chair, Regent Penley, this is a existing program for NAU, so there would be no changes to the curriculum. It's a really expansion of a location. We currently have this offered right now at the Flagstaff location as well as Scottsdale. It's also online as well. This is a another location, and so it's not a new program either in terms of needing to follow that curriculum change to have that be brought forward.
But has it been discussed with the other two universities per the procedures that we've established?
Madam Chair, Regent Penley, we had discussed this internally. I'm not sure that we've gotten, had any specific discussions with the other two universities for this program, because we recognize this would be a existing program that would not necessarily need to have that discussion.
Please.
Chair Pacheco, John, could you just remind us of the procedures for an expansion like this?
I'm sorry, I was occupied in the expansion like what?
Chad can do it.
Sorry.
Chad or Karen? Chad? Karen, if you'd like, you can move to the table if you want to address the body.
Zoom to speak for Chad, but the procedure would be, you're absolutely right, Regent Penley, that we would notify our colleagues with ASU and University of Arizona about a unique combination of program and location. We haven't done that yet. We are waiting to see whether or not we would move forward with this arrangement, and having with that resolved, we will do that right away. So we will not ignore the procedure.
Regent Pacheco, Chair Pacheco, I have nothing further to add other than the novel program procedure hasn't been followed yet. This is a little bit different because capital is moving in a separate silo than academics is normally used to. So what we have here is an excellent opportunity, which we'll discuss in our next committee meeting, on how to reorganize and revise how we bring items to the committee.
So should this be tabled since the other process has not occurred?
And Regent Penley, that's actually a question I would ask the regents. Would you like to table this item to ensure that the policies are followed, or would you like this to continue to move forward with the caveat that we will table any future item that this policy is not, does not adhere, that we don't adhere to the policy with? So regents, how would you like to address this?
My instinct is to follow up over the next few weeks and get it resolved with the other universities while keeping the current timetable to not slow these people down. And then before the September meeting, the end of the month meeting, which I guess was when we will hear it next, we need to have established that this has been resolved before we actually make the vote. Does that make any sense, Larry? Yes.
So Regent Penley, would that be a nice solution to the concern that you brought forward?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Regent Mata?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I agree, and I know that this, like you say, is timing for the decision of moving with the landlord. So I agree with, to do this.
Thank you, Regent Mata. John, we would like to make a request from a committee standpoint that the policy is adhered to before any item is put on the agenda moving forward, so we can make sure that Regent Penley's concern is addressed. And if there is some sort of timing challenge, if you'll let us know right away so we can ensure that the other universities are apprised, just given, the dynamics.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So Regent Penley, if that addresses your concern, we will move forward with the motion.
So if we move forward with the motion, does that mean that this lease will be executed prior to the academic process?
Madam Chairman, Regent Penley, so what we're doing today is a recommendation to the full board. And
So we have plenty of time,
yeah,
John.
we won't
as
put it,
usual.
we won't put it on that agenda until this process is
Perfect.
completed.
Thank you, Regent Pacheco.
Okay, is there any other conversation or comments around this issue? Hearing none, I move that the committee forward to the full board for approval the Northern Arizona University request to sublease space from Kind Hospitality, Inc. at Skybridge, Arizona for the School of Hotel and Restaurant Management's Mesa's Workforce Development Center as presented in the executive summary and including the caveat for notification that Regent Penley brought forward. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Thank you, Regent Penley. Thank you, Bjorn. Item 8. Letta, you ready? Okay. Item 8. The board office asks the committee to review for consideration on first reading the proposed revisions to board policies in Chapter 7 related to capital definitions. Letta will present for us this afternoon.
Madam Chair, Regents, item number 8 is first reading of a capital policy amendment. The board office is asking the board to clarify a definition, commercial in nature specifically. This issue came before the committee at our May 26th meeting. At that meeting, NAU requested to enter into a lease with the intergovernmental agency called Mountain Line to build a new commercial driver's license course at their Flagstaff campus. That made us realize we do need to clarify this definition because the policy intent for commercial lease was never to include governmental entities. So we're just clarifying this to make sure they are excluded. And this definition has been vetted and the language has been approved by all 3 universities. Thank you.
Thank you, Letta. Any comments, questions for Letta? Or around these definitions? Are you sure, Regent Herbold?
No.
You look like you were on the verge of saying something. Hearing none, I move that the committee forward to the full board for approval on first reading the proposed revisions to the board policies 7-101 capital definitions and 7-207 leases as presented in the executive summary. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. And now we are on item 9 and our last item for this afternoon. The board office asks the committee to review the fiscal year 2023 budget for the Arizona Teachers Academy, and John Arnold from the Arizona Board of Regents will present this item to us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we have like 20 minutes for this item, so thank you.
You're welcome. To you.
Regents, each year the legislature provides funding for the Arizona Teachers Academy, and that funding is divided between 5 institutions, our 3 universities, and the Pima Community College and the Maricopa Community College system. And so we ask that our policies require the board to allocate those funds among those 5 institutions. Last year in the Teachers Academy Scholarship Program cost about just under $25 million, $24.7 million. This year we have about $21 million available for allocation. That money is from 2 pots. One is a $15 million appropriation from the legislature. The other is $6 million that is continuing funds from a transfer we received from Prop 207 that came from funds generated from marijuana sales. So there's about $6 million left in that fund. And then the $15 million appropriation for a total of $21 million. The expenditures are in 4 different areas. One key area is scholarships. And then second, induction funds. The statute requires we provide 1 year of induction, which is training for new teachers entering the classroom for 1 year after they graduate. National board certification scholarships. So these are for current teachers that want to pursue a national board certification. Testing and certifications. This is for students who have graduated to go and get the necessary certification to become a certified teacher. And then a few administration dollars. So what we did is we fully funded induction. So compared to the 22, that went from $1.5 million to almost $3 million, $2.8 million. And this is because additional teachers have graduated and are moving out into the classroom space. So we had to add the additional induction costs. We fully funded testing and certifications. That went from $176,000 to $2.7 million, or $176,000 to $268,000. And so where we took the haircut is in scholarships. We reduced scholarship funding by 25%. Last year, we spent $22.7 million. This year, we're allocating just under $17 million for scholarships. That has left us in a position of a shortfall. Based on surveys with our 3 institutions, we estimate a current year shortfall of about $13 million. The biggest piece of which is at ASU, so about an $8 million shortfall at ASU. That shortfall is divided up between 2 classes of students, about $6 million where the students we've let into the program and the universities are carrying that cost. And then about $7 million are actually on waiting lists, is what I understand. Regent Herbold.
So this thing is not capped?
Madam Chair, Regent Herbold, no.
So you could lose tons of money.
That is correct. The statute.
Why would we do that?
Well, so we didn't. The legislature adopted a statute creating the program. And then put certain dollars into it. Now, we have instituted a waiting list for the program. And so in that sense, it is capped at the dollars that are available.
Okay. That's pretty shoddy, but I understand.
Shoddy in terms of waiting lists, or I'm not quite following?
Well, it's, what a way to run the railroad. I mean, if you have that budget, given that it's literally unlimited, that doesn't make any sense to me. We ought to have a mechanism for being good stewards here and not gobbling up somebody's money.
Regent Pacheco, Regent Herbold, the governor initiated this program as a stated goal to reverse the long-term trend of declining teachers in the state and a long-term high need to address the teacher shortfall in the state. We're often cited in national stories as probably the number one state that needs additional teachers.
We should probably put a safety valve in the budget to protect. I mean, it's you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
It's what it is.
And Regent Pacheco, Regent Herbold, when this program started, the governor's office came to the universities and looked to us in a partnership way. And we initially funded the full cost of the scholarship. The state came in as a partner and they funded part of the scholarship, and then they took over the full cost of the scholarship just over the last 2 years. And we're back in a situation this year where we're going to fund part of the scholarship unless we get additional funding. But as we move forward, it's really it is a difficult program to manage from the university's perspectives because we don't know how much money we're going to get often until deep in the spring.
Yeah.
When we're already awarding these scholarships. So, and this year in particular, the legislature didn't pass a budget till mid-June, later than mid-June, after which most students are enrolled. So we're trying to balance it, but points are well taken. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Regent Penley.
Thank you, Chair Pacheco. John, what will be the impact of this shortfall, which I'm very sorry to see, on our ability to fund master's degrees for teachers in specialized subject areas like math and science?
Thank you, Regent Penley, Regent Pacheco, Regent Penley. We have advised the universities to prioritize new teachers. Really, the intent of the program is to bring new teachers into the classroom, and so we have suggested that the master's degree, current teachers who are seeking additional education, that those be a secondary priority, unless they are seeking a specific certification, so like a dual enrollment certification, or if you have an existing teacher moving into a special needs certification, that type of structure, we would look at that on par. But in terms of just a teacher trying to expand their education, secondary.
The reason I raise that issue is because our regional accreditor, the Higher Learning Commission, has set as a requirement that teachers who teach dual enrollment must have a master's degree in that specialized areas or a certain number of hours in those areas, student credit hours in those areas. And so we are continuing to do that, or we're not?
The advice we have given to the universities is to prioritize new teachers and existing teachers seeking a certification that would allow them to teach new things. Secondary to that would be teachers seeking a master's degree within the same subject matter that they're teaching. So the answer is yes, but as noted, we're maxed out in the number of slots we have for this year and have people on a waiting list. I do not have information on who makes up the waiting list, whether that's undergraduate students seeking a teaching degree or current teachers seeking a dual enrollment certification. And so far, we've had relatively few current teachers seeking that dual enrollment certification. That program is relatively new. We're just getting that information out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm asking these questions because I think we need to encourage teachers in the state to seek these specializations so that we have a labor force that's prepared for the economy that lies ahead. I can also recall the governor early in his term being quite concerned that teachers who spoke to him during the summer were having to fork over their own funds to study at the universities in graduate level courses. So both the governor's concern of that time period, as well as my continuing concern that we enlarge dual enrollments in this state, particularly in rural areas and low income areas, I just don't see us doing that in the way we need to. So it strikes me that we need to really come up with a plan that will encourage that kind of support from our legislature if we are indeed to have the kind of educational program needed for the future of this economy.
Thank you, sir.
Are there any other comments or questions? Okay. Hearing none, I move that the committee forward to the full board for approval the fiscal year 2023 budget for the Arizona Teachers Academy as presented in the executive summary. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. And with that motion, if the regents don't have any other additional comments on today's agenda, and I'll open it up briefly, I'd like to conclude the committee for this afternoon. Are there any other comments? Okay. This does then officially conclude the Finance, Capital, and Resources Committee meeting. Thank you very much for your participation today.